The studio was buzzing long before the live cameras switched on. Viewers across the country were tuned in for what was being promoted as a powerful discussion between two political powerhouses, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. Tensions had been rising online between their supporters for weeks, sparked by social media jabs and conflicting interviews. Now, they were finally face to face under studio lights, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. As the moderator welcomed the audience and framed the topic, Women in Power, Changing the Political Landscape, there was still hope that the discussion would remain measured and respectful. But anyone who had seen Crockett or Bondi speak in the past knew better. These weren't women who played it safe. And once the conversation began, it was clear neither one was backing down. Pam Bondi took the first opportunity to speak and wasted no time setting a pointed tone. Her words were polished, her posture poised, but there was venom behind her smile. "I think we've seen a rise in political performance art recently," she said, glancing briefly in Jasmine's direction. "There's a difference between standing for your community and turning every committee meeting into a viral moment." There were a few scattered laughs from the audience, nervous, unsure. Jasmine didn't react right away. Her hands rested calmly on the table, her gaze fixed on Bondi with cool intensity. The host gave a tight smile and turned to Crockett for her initial response, but Bondi jumped back in, doubling down. "Frankly, it concerns me," Bondi continued. "We're seeing politicians who seem more interested in trending online than delivering real results. We didn't come up in politics to be internet celebrities. We came here to govern." The implication couldn't have been clearer. Jasmine Crockett had recently gone viral for an impassioned speech during a House committee hearing, where she boldly confronted a fellow representative's thinly veiled racist remarks. The moment had made headlines. Bondi clearly thought it made Crockett vulnerable. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She waited until Bondi had fully exhausted her statement, then leaned forward just slightly, the corner of her mouth curling into the faintest smile. The host turned to her and asked, "Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to respond?" "Oh, I'd love to," Jasmine said, her voice low, smooth, and deliberate. "First, let me say this, it's real convenient to talk about performance when you've spent your entire career defending politicians who literally staged policies that hurt millions. I don't need a lecture from someone who turned a blind eye to corruption just because it wore the same party label." The room went quiet. "Let's be honest, Pam," Jasmine said, addressing her directly. "You didn't mind going viral when you were out there making TV appearances defending the indefensible. But now, suddenly, you're concerned about internet celebrities." A few gasps sounded from the audience. Even the moderator looked unsure whether to interject. "I'm not here to be liked," Jasmine continued, "and I'm definitely not here to be polite to people who've spent years sugarcoating systemic injustice. I go viral because I speak truth. Not because I planned a photo op or wrote a talking point with a focus group." Pam shifted in her seat, clearly thrown off. "You talk about governing. What exactly were you governing when you refused to hold power accountable in your own state? You see, the thing about power is, it doesn't like being challenged. And the second a black woman speaks up without apologizing, suddenly it's called drama. But when you do it, it's called leadership." The applause began tentatively, then it grew, clapping and whistles filling the studio. Jasmine hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't moved dramatically, but her tone was surgical. Her words hit like a scalpel, precise and unforgettable. Pam Bondi opened her mouth to respond but stopped herself. She glanced at the host, perhaps expecting support, but the host remained quiet. Jasmine leaned back in her seat and crossed her arms. "I came into politics because the people in my community were tired of being overlooked. Tired of polished talking heads with empty promises. So if my truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask why that is, because I'm not going anywhere." The moment hung heavy in the air. The audience had witnessed something more than just a clapback, it was a live, undeniable shift in power. One woman had walked in expecting to control the narrative. The other had walked in ready to rewrite it. The cameras cut to commercial, but the energy in the studio didn't relax, it became more charged. Producers scurried across the stage with earpieces buzzing, trying to keep the segment on track, while murmurs and side conversations echoed from the audience seats. Pam Bondi was clearly rattled. Her jaw was tight, her smile frozen, and her eyes followed Jasmine Crockett with a mix of disbelief and irritation as the congresswoman calmly sipped her water and chatted briefly with the makeup artist retouching her powder. Jasmine, for her part, was the picture of composed confidence. She had delivered her words without theatrics or anger, but with the kind of controlled passion that made it impossible to dismiss her. And now, even off camera, she held the attention of the entire room. A couple of younger audience members exchanged wide-eyed glances and began whispering into their phones, likely tweeting or texting about what they'd just witnessed. As the countdown to the next segment began, the host's voice crackled through the earpiece, nervously trying to find a way to ease the tension for the remaining broadcast. But what had just happened on screen wasn't something that could be brushed away with a joke or a change in topic. The confrontation had ignited something real, and the audience knew it. The show returned live, and the host awkwardly transitioned to the next subject, public trust in political leadership. Pam Bondi jumped at the opportunity to reclaim control of the conversation. Her voice was firm, perhaps more than necessary, as she launched into a monologue about law, order, and the importance of preserving institutional integrity. She name-dropped statistics, court cases, and historical context, but it didn't land. There was something hollow in her delivery now. Something rehearsed. The audience, who had just seen a raw and unrehearsed moment of truth from Jasmine, no longer seemed captivated. The buzz in the room wasn't about what Pam was saying, it was about the echo of Jasmine's words still ringing in their minds. When it was Jasmine's turn again, she didn't even try to counter Pam's legal citations. Instead, she brought the conversation back to the people. "We can throw numbers around all day," she said. "But if the people those numbers represent are still living in fear, still being pushed to the margins, what exactly are we accomplishing? Policy doesn't mean much if it's not grounded in empathy and accountability." The audience clapped again, not as explosive as before, but firm and supportive. "I've sat with mothers who've lost their sons to police violence," she continued. "I've stood with workers fighting for fair wages. I've listened to teenagers who don't feel safe walking home at night. They're not asking for statistics, they're asking to be seen. And if being passionate about their stories makes me emotional, or performative, to some folks, then I'll wear that label proudly." Pam stayed silent this time. Her usual arsenal of counterpoints didn't seem fit to combat lived experience. She glanced at her notes, then at the audience, then back at the host. But her fire was gone. A guest analyst joined the segment toward the end, a veteran political commentator known for neutrality. Even she couldn't ignore what had just occurred. "That was one of the most authentic moments I've seen on this show in a long time," she said, turning to Jasmine. "Whether people agree or not, you spoke from a place that can't be coached. And that's what's missing in politics today." Pam smiled faintly, but it was clear she felt sidelined. She tried to interject one more time, but the host signaled the wrap-up. After the show ended, while cameras were no longer rolling, the impact was undeniable. Staffers whispered among themselves. Producers shook Jasmine's hand with quiet admiration. And viewers at home, they were already flooding social media. Clips of Jasmine's "Let me finish" and "I didn't come to be liked" were clipped, subtitled, and shared across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Within an hour, hashtags like #CrockettClapback and #PamGotCooked were trending nationally. Memes popped up. Fan accounts reposted the moment like it was a highlight reel from a championship game. Pam Bondi didn't make any official comment that night. In fact, she declined to appear in the post-show panel. Instead, she exited quietly, flanked by her aides, her face tight with forced composure. Some say she muttered, "That was a setup," under her breath as she left, though no one could confirm it. Jasmine, on the other hand, stayed to greet some audience members. A young black girl in the front row asked for a photo, telling Jasmine, "You made me feel like I could do this one day." Jasmine smiled, crouched down beside her, and said, "Then you already can." And with that, Jasmine Crockett walked out of the studio, not just as a congresswoman or a guest on a political show, but as a symbol of unapologetic truth in a world too used to polite lies.